So welcome everyone. My name is Debbie O'Kane, and along with Dawn Carol Nish, who's going to be moderating, we welcome you on behalf of the North Fork Environmental Council, located in Mattituck. And we are very happy to have a wonderful guest speaker this evening. Kevin is going to be speaking on sand, seawalls, and sea level rise. Kevin is the founder and president of Defend H2O, and that was founded in 2014 to protect our groundwater, surface waters, wetlands, and beaches. And specifically, Defend H2O is dedicated to defending our natural resources, clean water, and the coastal zone through science, education, and law. So Kevin has been doing this for well over 30 years. I've known Kevin, we've been friends for over 20 years, slogging away at all of this. And Kevin uses the term water warrior in his email address. And I just think that's absolutely the perfect way to describe him. He's relentless. He never gives up. He's got so much energy and so much knowledge, and he's here to share that knowledge with us tonight. And hopefully we can take the information that he's sharing with us and have some action items to go along with it and spread the word as well. So before I have Kevin get started, I'd just like to tell you that you are all muted at this point, so we don't have any background rustling. But we encourage you to submit questions, and Dawn will be moderating those questions after Kevin's presentation. So if you just use the Q&A button, the icon down at the very bottom of your screen, you can click on that and submit a question, and then we'll go through those at the end of the presentation. So Kevin, we are all ready for you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate the invitation and the very nice introduction. We do go back a long ways. I'm going to go ahead and try to pull up the screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. Debbie had introduced me. My name's Kevin McAllister. I'm founder and president of Defend H2O. And by way of my background, with respect to beaches, my master's work was in coastal zone management. So a great deal of science is revolving around beaches. I lived in South Florida for about 15 years, and much of that time was spent in shoreline protection. I think what also qualifies me is a number of years while I was going through college, I lifeguarded in South Florida full-time, year-round, 365. So, I could tune in and see changes in the coast that certainly, I can attribute to, again, coastal processes. The photo I'm showing, I thought this is pretty dramatic. This is North Topsail, North Carolina. I'm sorry, I don't have a pointer, but I'll try to navigate and direct you for things that you should pay attention to. This is a barrier island. At the bottom of the screen is an inlet. You can see in the top right-hand corner, if you look, you'll see expansive tidal wetlands that are present. So again, this spit of land was developed over the decades, and now we're in dire straits with respect to sustainability of this community in my eyes. I'll say a disciple of Orrin Pilkey. Dr. Pilkey is professor emeritus from Duke University. I read his book, The Beaches Are Moving, during my college time, and I was really moved by, I'll say, the simplicity and the position of Dr. Pilkey as to managing beaches, and particularly with the engineered approach. This really struck me, and I wanted to share it, the dynamic equilibrium, which really says it all. And I'll walk you through this. And then as we get into the program, which is really heavy on photographs And I apologize for some of the poor resolution, which I clipped from different locations. But we'll start at the top. Wave energy, of course, is the driving force, around beaches. If you look at the arrows, now moving to the left, you'll see wave energy affects the shape of the beach and vice versa. The shape of the beach is influenced by sand supply, and also it influences sand supply. And then, of course, sea level rise, as we really acknowledged and got a grasp on it, I'll say over the last 10 years or so, is omnipresent and will certainly have a great deal of influence going through time. Wave energy, this is pretty dramatic. This is Winter Storm Grayson. That was in 2018, January 4th. It moved up the East Coast very quickly. This is called the extratropical cyclone. So the energy that's out there, obviously driving waves and currents, is the storm energy. Again, Grayson was a very powerful winter storm, for all intents and purposes, a winter hurricane. It did reach 75 miles an hour in Nantucket. Was responsible for a great deal of erosion, moving sand. And this, is pronounced. When it comes to the energy, we are talking, of course, about the wind velocity. So more powerful winds, of course, will have more energy. Another factor is the fetch, or the span of open water where the wind actually blows, and the duration of the winds. I have seen small storms set up immediately offshore, and just 2 or 3 days of grinding 30-mile-an-hour winds at a oblique angle cause enormous erosion, 50 plus feet just lost in a matter of a couple days. In contrast, there's long period ground swells, storms that might be 1,000 miles plus offshore that are generating a wave train that actually will build beaches. So not all energy is destructive. Much of it can also cause, lead to accretion. Beach Science 101. This is a summer beach. I'm including, of course, the dune system in there. If you look at the base of the dune, you'll see a plateau. This is called the Pioneer Zone. This is an area that was eroded back. You can see the vertical scarp as you look deeper into the dune. So over the course of several years, dune hadn't recovered. So it was building out. Again, this is a summer dry beach. When we speak of the shape of the beach, there are really principally 2 cycles, the winter and summer cycle. So on a perched summer beach with favorable winds, lack of energy, you do have accretion and buildup. The sands will blow landward and raise elevation over time. This is a late season. This was one of the first tropical storms that was heading up the East Coast. You can see the surge that flooded, again, a summer beach. If you look to the right, you'll see the white water. That's the berm that drops down into the sea. Again, because of surge and just the presence of this tropical was driving, the seawater landward, and ended up flooding this dry summer beach, and ultimately moved into now transition. I mentioned to you about the shape of the beach, and work you through that. Principally, the sand source, of course, is the beach. Offshore sandbars provide sand for the beach. And then up and down the beach where literally, there's transport, these are the 3 sources of sand. This is that same storm approaching, starting to scour and cause a scarp. If you look into the screen, it was a very hard west wind, so it was really scouring and driving current, really starting to expose the beach face. This is the following day when or 2 days after the energy really did hit. Now we're moving into what's called a winter profile, albeit in September when the storm hit. But you can see how the beach is flattened. The sand is dragged offshore, forming sandbars. So again, a summer beach is perched, more of a plateau. A winter beach is a lower profile with forming sandbars. Again, this is all part of the system that we have to be looking at, everything from the dunes seaward out to what's called the closure depth, which is roughly probably 25 feet in depth, where there's still sediment transport occurring. This is the following season, and I described to you earlier, I've seen beaches that weld. In other words, an offshore sandbar or an erosion might have occurred and the sand is gone. This was really a very small groundswell, but it was favorable and really drove that sandbar landward. I watched it over the course of a couple of days. And then, the two-tone is what you're seeing is new beach. So it pretty instantaneous in many ways. But I guess the message is, it comes and it goes, and we have to manage that dynamic change to the coast. Beaches and dunes. When I hear folks talk about beaches, we have to be managing these in systems, meaning, the entirety of a dune system and dry beach. The functionality and the stability of these areas does rely on the system being intact. This is out in Amagansett, a stretch of roughly a couple miles where the development was never allowed to encroach. So you have a very wide dune field, and as a result, a very stable beach through this area. While I talk about beaches and dunes, now we're on the, this is actually on the North Shore, I'm sorry, on the Peconics between the forks, and now we get into the bluff system. As much, as important on Long Island Sound in the Peconic Bays as our dunes are on Atlantic Beach. They're a major sediment source, so there's the bank account, if you will, of sediment. Under wave attack, that bluff will slump, releasing sand onto a dry beach. And this picture just depicts that as a system, you have a very stable and intact recreational beach. This photo was just taken Sunday. In fact, you can see Southwest Airlines tail on the logo. This is in Bellport, the new inlet. You can see looking to the left is to the east, to the right is to the west. What's called longshore transport or littoral drift, that's the sediment moving up and down the coast, being carried by turbulence, of course, energy, wave energy, as well as currents. This breach occurred in 2012 after Sandy. This is Hurricane Sandy that came up our way, punched through the barrier island, a very natural process. The environmental community, we were urging the Army Corps not to close this breach because that was the initial response, as well as with the elected officials. They had to close this. It'd be unnecessary flooding in the bays, causing flooding problems for the mainland. That did not hold true. It was very minor elevations, but I'll say the silver lining in this event ultimately allowed for ocean bay exchange. So we did see water quality improvements as a result of, again, tidal flushing. But if you look at the mosaic, you can clearly see how on a flood tide, transporting sediment, it is depositing what's called a flood delta. So that's the the feature that you're seeing in front of you that looks like a mosaic. Again, this is just as of Sunday, so very recent. If you look at the very narrow inlet. That's, and I'll go back to, I'm sorry. There's the same inlet. This is after Sandy, but you can obviously see it was a much wider inlet at the time, just opened. Now we're a closing system slowly, but nevertheless, there's enormous sediment that has been deposited. Again, post Sandy, and the other was more recent. Dr. Charles Flagg from Stony Brook University, he's been monitoring this breach very closely since it was opened. I believe he's indicated that it certainly is trending toward closure. And that's not unexpected. Historically, along Fire Island, there were multiple inlets that came and went over time. Some were closed by Robert Moses in his endeavor. Now we get into the interventions, the engineering of the coastline. This is the inlet to Lake Montauk. Again, on the updrift side, which is to the right of the screen. So the littoral drift through this area, or sediment transport, is from east to west, so from the right to the left. By virtue of these jetties, and I'll describe those to you. Jetties are shore perpendicular structures, normally stone, associated with inlets. The same structure on a beach without an inlet is referred to as a groin. So there is a bit of a distinction. With an engineered navigable inlet, the problem is these are normally dredged. So you have a deeper water and almost a Venturi effect, where the jet going offshore on an ebb flow as well as a flood tide coming in is very powerful. You can see the updrift jetty has a retained sand. And if you look at the parking lot immediately to the right of the updrift jetty, and then to the right of that was a growing dune field. This is Gin Beach in Montauk, a very wide, stable, accreted beach by virtue of the jetty. But because the sediment or the longshore drift was disrupted, now we have a deficit on the downdrift side, what we refer to as a sand-starved beach. You can see the offset. So the scour effect is in full force on the downdrift side. This will hold true for groins as well. But it is a problem, and we've got to do a better job of ensuring that the sand is transported over to remain in the system. Shinnecock Inlet, and I'm showing you the downdrift side of Shinnecock. So top of the screen is to the east. And as you look, this was early spring or late winter, right before the contractors were brought in to fill out this beach. You can see the commercial fishing docks with some restaurants to the left, a long developed area. But again, this is the commercial fleet. A real problem. They were in dire straits when we were in the winter months and this beach was receding. Again, very typical, being downdrift, sand starved. The sediment's not reaching this location until much further down the beach. So you end up with a bowl effect. In fact, this is called the bowl by the surfing community because of its general shape. Another view on the downdrift jetty and the beach itself. You can again see that bowl effect. What I want to draw your attention to, and again, this is a deep water inlet, routinely dredged for navigation to provide access for the commercial dock and other boaters. There's no turning back. This was, I believe, the 38 hurricane punched this one through, and then it was ultimately stabilized with the jetties. But if you look at the top of the screen, if you see those shoals and the islands, again, this is the flood delta. So there's enormous beach sand or beach compatible sand that as the current and the jet is taking it inshore into the bay, ultimately the material drops out and forms, again, these deltas. And I would argue that we have to do a better job of recovering that sand and placing it on the downdrift side. So again, it stays in the system, and the vulnerability in this area is not as extreme. So it's an important management activity that, again, in my view, has not been managed properly. And I will tell you, with my years of experience in South Florida, virtually every inlet that exists in South Florida has some form of sand bypassing program associated with it. And what sand bypassing would be, it might be a roving dredge that would recover some of that delta sand, sand that is accumulating in the navigable cut itself, as well as offshore and as a deposit. Here's a screen grab from an aerial, again, looking at Shinnecock Inlet. The flood delta is very pronounced. So that, again, that for the most part is beach compatible sediments. And what I mean by that, in a high energy dynamic system like an ocean beach, what is able to really deposit and be on the beach is coarse sediments, because again, the energy and what will drop out is the heavy stuff. You see that on the flood delta. What is not showing up is the ebb tidal shoal, but you can clearly see that scour effect on the downdrift side. And then it looks to be a bit of a bump out. More engineered inlets. This is in Peconic Bay in Southold. So on the North Fork, this was a shallow coastal pond. Some time ago, it was dredged for boating access. The jetty itself was overbuilt. I mean, that was, I believe, roughly 300 feet long. In a prior effort, I actually filed a lawsuit to try to stop this project from happening. Unfortunately, the courts did not rule in our favor. It was went ahead and it was built. The darker area, of course, is a dredge cut for a basin. But again, drawing your attention, updrift is to the right of the screen. So the sand is moving from the top right-hand corner to the bottom left-hand corner. You can clearly see that a very wide beach on the updrift side, because the jetty is essentially a stopgap. So it is trapping sand and causing a backup up the coast. These properties are protected. I would argue this jetty was overbuilt specifically for that reason. We'll call it a bit of a sand grab. On the downdrift side, if you look closely, and it doesn't show it very well, but you can see the shore hardening structure that has come in front of those homes. And I know this section very well. I predicted this 15 years ago, roughly when we were challenging this project. But the erosion from being sand starved occurred, and it compelled the property owners to install their own structures to protect their backyards and their homes. And this is all because of a over-engineered jetty that for this particular coastal pond, is it really necessary? And I'd argue it isn't. Long Island Sound, this is Goldsmith Inlet in Southold. Again, this is a groin, and I'll give you a history of this. I believe in the 60s, Suffolk County built this groin/jetty. The plan was for a navigable inlet to be dredged to then build a service a marina, a Suffolk County marina that was to be built. I don't know what happened to that plan or that project. It never made it, but unfortunately this groin was installed. And if you look again, the littoral drift in this location from the left to the right. So the groin itself is a stopgap it is trapping sand because of slowing the current, and you need turbulence and movement to suspend the sand, ultimately then depositing it over time. And the development of a dune came in. So these 6 or 7 properties, they really benefited from this structure and have an enormous accreted beach because of it. My understanding, there's talk for a navigational channel to dredge under the guise of water quality. I would submit that we should really be looking at removing this groin and allowing the unhindered transport of sand through this area. And I think if that was done, then it would be wait and see as to the water quality in Goldsmith Pond. But again, this was a mistake decades ago, and I hope we don't compound that mistake with a deep dredge channel that will again cause the jet and further hindrance of sand transport through this area. Now we get into some shore parallel structures. This is a rock revetment, very typical of the stone. High energy Montauk Beach. This was built in front of a community, mobile homes essentially. It's Montauk Shores community around the Ditch Plains area. The revetment was allowed to come in decades ago, and if I could show you an aerial, you'll see how pronounced the end scour is on the downdrift side. The obvious effect is it is anchoring the shoreline. As much as some argue that revetments dissipate wave energy, they do somewhat, but not to the extent where they allow beaches to accrete in front of them. This is an eroding beach. Sea level is rising, the shoreline wants to migrate landward, and now we are fixing that shoreline. You can see the turbulence in front of the rock. The ability to settle out sand is just not happening. So, this is going to be more problematic over time. Low tide, you can barely pass this area. It's just a matter of time before it's impassable. Another form of revetment, this is Peconic Bay on the Southampton side. This was a 1.5 mile long structure that was installed in front of a bluff headland, again, retaining that sediment supply. Remember, dunes and bluffs are important sediment sources. So now we are locking in the sand from that bluff, so it will not basically replenish beaches in front of it. It is fixing the shoreline. Sea level is rising. The shoreline is looking to migrate. And as the photo shows, this area is often impassable. And for the most part, the 1.5 miles of revetment, that's basically lost shoreline as a result of this particular installation. And I guess further consideration, there are no structures that were in jeopardy. This is all private land that was looked to be protected by this installation. A low profile revetment through Shinnecock Bay. This is at a Tiana Beach. This is public parkland. This is called a gabion. You can see the small stone that's caged in the fence mesh, essentially. This runs about 300 feet long. When this was installed, the argument was it would never appear. It was trenched in, so it was dug in and covered with sand. This is roughly 10 years old. You can see now with the, again, migrating shorelines moving landward, the exposure that happened in this area. This is a killing field for horseshoe crabs. I know, again, from my professional work, this area, Shinnecock Bay, is probably one of the highest density areas of horseshoe crabs that I'm aware of. And, this is real problematic with respect to accessing nesting sites, which is really the high end of, the high tide in the moist sand. So, problematic elimination of important habitat by virtue of stabilizing this shoreline. Geotextile sandbags, again, this is Gardner's Bay in East Hampton. The geotextile, the sandbags are coming in, geocubes they call them. They'll stack these, the bags themselves are attached via this fabric, which is a heavy nylon material. I refer to these as a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're every bit stone or vertical bulkhead. You can, again, see the anchored shoreline, inability to migrate landward. That shoreline will eventually drown and, be lost for public access. Bulkheads, of course, we're all familiar with these. This is Long Island Sound up around Nissaquag, which is western Suffolk County. Very large wall installed years ago in front of the bluff. Properties and homes are behind it. The intent, of course, was to stem the erosion of the bluff, but in doing so, fixing the shoreline, restricting shoreline migration landward, causing turbulence under wave attack. So again, a drowning sandy beach. This is low tide. If you look at the staining on the bulkhead, roughly 4 feet of, elevation through there, you can clearly see at high tide, the water's up on the wall and impassable for public access. And I should point out, this is really in the middle of 2 public beaches. This stretch of about 1.5 miles is a very popular walking beach for both those public parks. Same area, a failing bulkhead, and it just gives you perspective of the migration of that shoreline. Again, without the bulkhead present and looking at that bluff, you're always going to have a beach, a walkable recreational beach that provides all the habitat for shorebirds, horseshoe crabs, etc., in a unobstructed, unaltered, unengineered way. Back to the east end, Great Peconic Bay. I point this out. I took this photo right where the photo starts at that piling, toward us, and the screen is a road end. So this is a very popular public access area for fishing. Again, the bulkhead installed in front of a bluff headland, fixing the shoreline, restricting migration, eliminating public access through this area. More dramatic, but the same impact, Southampton Atlantic coast. This is a 3-sided steel sheet pile seawall installed around this home, which is a vacation home. On this particular property, it's a very deep property. So the ability to move this structure back was absolutely doable in this location. But unfortunately, the approvals were issued for this seawall bulkhead. And you can see in this condition, this was a winter beach, unpassable. So it's very problematic. The public trust doctrine, which is US common law, it was really received from England in the day and dates back to Roman law, where the air, flowing streams, shorelines, this was all public land. And the intent was, and the obligation was for government to protect the public trust, the public use of these areas. And I would argue that we are losing public access left and right for failure on the part of government to adhere to the public trust. And where private properties are involved, private actions, they're not enforcing. And over the course of year or two when, you have some obstructions, one can say, well, it's not a big deal. Well, over 10, 20-year time span when these structures are creeping in at an alarming rate, and I see them physically on the shorelines as well as aerial photo studying, reconnaissance. They're coming in left and right, and they're going to be a real problem not only for public access, but I submit water quality. You are losing, in some cases, wetlands that are filtering our waters, as well as critical habitat. So, the horseshoe crabs, the shorebirds, on a, again, in the estuarine environment, shorelines are important for the ecosystem and the, entirety of the system. Run you through this. Montauk, of course, I think is featured prominently in the press for the last several years. I know certainly I've been addressing it. This is the downtown portion of Montauk Beach. So when you come into the downtown, you'll know you come down that hill, for roughly a half a mile, 3/4 a mile is the commercial zone. These were to the left, you'll see hotels or condominiums. I believe these are some of our condominium owned, multi owners on these properties, but roughly there's about 10 buildings that were ultimately threatened by erosion. I will point out when these structures came in the 60s, they actually flat topped the primary dune for availability of vistas to see the ocean, and built right on top of the protected feature, which is, again, back to the system, beaches and dunes, or beaches and bluffs. They have to be intact in order to have the system respond naturally and adapt to that fluctuation. Geotextiles were installed about 4 years ago. Many of us oppose this project, including threatening a lawsuit. It was clear the courts would not rule in our favor to stop it. So we had to withdraw the lawsuit. We couldn't afford to challenge them. This was sponsored by the town of East Hampton. The Army Corps was really the project leader. They built it. It was federal dollars that built this installation. The sandbags encompass about a little more than half a mile of the coast. They were, the dune face was trenched, 14,000 sandbags. These are roughly about 8 feet long, although, you don't really see the scale in the photo, but stacked or filled with a slurry of sand and water. They de-water them, and they stack these geometrically for the protection. Ultimately, over the top, there was, I call it a veneer of sand. It was a couple of feet of sand that was placed over the sandbags. And what I felt was silly, and this goes to my experience on trying to grow dunes or develop dunes over geotextiles. The plants, if you look at them, are very anemic, and this is a full growing season. The fronting grasses are not taking root. The soils were not compatible. This is trucked in sand over the veneer of over the sandbags. So it was what we call quarry sand. It did not contain the trace elements that marine sediments have. The American beach grass, growing anemic, is purely cosmetics. There would be no stability here, as the next photo shows. This is a wintertime photograph, I think late winter after subsequent storms and the erosion, exposing these sandbags and back to, the dune, the grasses that were planted over the top. Again, the ability to drive roots and encounter the geotextiles, the plants will be anemic. They won't stabilize this area. The Army Corps the town, Suffolk County, they like to refer to this as a reinforced dune. This is not a dune. If I can leave you with one thing, this is an engineered structure. So putting sand over the top does not mean it's a dune. It does not provide the sand supply and the resilience that a natural dune does provide. The material that was brought in, again, you can see the orange coloration to it. It was quarry sand that was brought in. I will tell you the maintenance obligations, which Suffolk County, your tax dollars go to. Suffolk County agreed to be a partner with East Hampton Town to pay for the maintenance. And this is really what the maintenance encompasses, was to keep some semblance of sand in front of the bags and over the bags. The county with the town is spending roughly $1 million every spring to do this. I believe this was the 4th installation of the face work on this particular downtown project. So, I'd argue it's forever with the maintenance. Another alternative, and obviously with the dredging, this is a seafaring ocean dredge that is set up. If you look at the top of the screen, now we're off of Shinnecock Inlet, you can see the downdrift side with the commercial docks that are present. So this dredge was just mobilizing on site. This was done last spring to basically fill in and recover some of that sediment that is lost to the system. And as I described to you, the flood delta that's inside the bay, there's what's called an ebb tidal shoal where the dredge is setting up on. This is a major sandbar that is deposited because of that ebb jet that comes out of the inlet. So ultimately carrying sediment that comes longshore, as well as what might be in suspension, as the ebb jet takes it offshore, at some point, you don't have the turbulence to keep material in suspension, and then it drops out. So the dredge is recovering this material and will place it down drift. A very positive thing. I've long held that we have not done a good job, again, of inlet management, sand bypassing, and we have to be more active. I would submit at least once a year that we're packing in the downdrift beaches on these inlets. And whether it be Petty's Pond, Lake Montauk, Shinnecock, Moriches, Fire Island, I mean, these inlets are throughout Long Island. And again, we've got to do a better job of recovering that sand that is lost due to their influence on coastal processes. They're pumping here, same dredge, pumping the material. They built this beach out a couple 100 feet, raised elevation. They went several 100 yards to the west, which is to the top left corner of the screen. Again, to fill in a very high hotspot, erosion hotspot, again, by virtue of the inlet. Sea level rise, the last part of that dynamic equilibrium, after roughly 5 or 6 years in the works, the DEC in February of 2017 actually adopted sea level rise projections and put it into environmental conservation law. I draw your attention to the Long Island region. If you look at on the far left is the time interval. Next to that is the low projection. And this is a throwaway category. This is the static conditions. You see 2 inches. We've seen a 2-inch rise roughly over the last 20 years on Long Island. I can physically see these changes in many areas on the East End and beyond, where, again, through my trained eyes, is just pure evidence of a rapidly accelerating sea level rise. But again, the low projections are throwaway. The high projection, and I'll draw your attention to the 50s. So roughly in the next 30 plus years, we're looking between 16 inches and 30 inches. That's monumental compared to what we have seen. So, the old adage, we ain't seen nothing yet, we haven't. The changes that will occur just are enormous and profound. These projections themselves, now they're a bit dated, of course. Even when these were in the works, as new science was coming forward with, the glacial retreat, I mean, these numbers, these are conservative numbers. So those 30 inches in the 2050s could very well be more extensive. Fire Island, I like this photo because it clearly shows, the migrating shoreline through largely an undeveloped area. This is, I believe, Bellport Beach. So you have to access it from the mainland by boat to the barrier island. And then there was a walkway, of course, to the gazebo. The gazebo was set back 100 feet from the edge of shoreline, or edge of dune years ago. And, just very rapidly with the changes we've seen, the migrating shoreline. So with sea level rise, obviously we are expanding waters, the migrating shorelines moving landward. And, here's a very important consideration that, again, has not been given enough attention, and that is coastal inundation. This is a photo of Dune Road in East Quogue. We are looking to the west. On the left is the dune field. It drops down, and actually the vegetation along the roadway on the left is wetland vegetation, as is the right. I can tell you from frequenting this area, the wetlands are migrating like an amoeba through this area, just finding their limits and moving with the bay influence, sea level rise. This is what we refer to as sunny day flooding. I coined this, or I should say I borrowed this term from Miami, which has used it, where as sea level comes up, it's denser than fresh water in the bay waters. So there's actually, if you can visualize a salt wedge that comes in subterranean under land along shorelines and will perch groundwater. So it raises groundwater at the tides. So this is a high tide. I know exactly when I took this photo is late September, and it was roughly 10 days of September splendor with the dry weather. This photograph with that blue sky, I mean, this is what we saw for the prior 10 days. So this is no rain event. This is coastal inundation that is occurring in multiple locations, Massac beaches, Girard Drive, Dune Road. I mean, the list goes on, Hashimomic in different areas on the North Shore. We can't combat this. A seawall doesn't stop water from coming up from below. A wide beach doesn't stop water from coming up below. In locations like this, I would argue we have to get real if we want to keep and maintain the integrity of a natural system through this area. We've got to start talking about a different option. Wading River on the North Shore of Long Island Sound. To the right of the screen, obviously, is a tidal marsh in there. And you see this small neighborhood that, presumably was built, obviously, when the beach was much further seaward. This probably came down off the bluff into a bit of a flat. So now, 8 or 10 homes that I'm looking at, you can see the groins that were constructed in front of the homes, the stone that juts seaward, trapping sand to the extent they can. Looks like a revetment on the far left home, stone pile just to build a seawall. What are we going to do here? We can't dredge Long Island Sound. It's a national estuary. The volume that is needed is enormous. And, I might point out to you the dredging itself, put it in perspective that one photo of the downdrift side of Shinnecock Inlet, I believe that was on the order of 500,000 cubic yards. 500,000 cubic yards offshore on the sea floor. Depending on depth, we're talking 50, 100 acre dredge cuts that might be 5-7 feet deep to get that volume that's needed along a mile stretch of beach. What's the implications to the fisheries? The lifespan on the nourished beach is roughly 3 to 4 years. This has been followed, and South Florida has been pumping beaches since the 70s down in Miami. We know it's through trials and tribulations how long these beaches last. I was on a project in Jupiter, Florida, where my role was the biology, the marine turtles, water quality, other considerations. The sediments that were pumped on that beach were not beach compatible. They were finer particle sediments. The engineers thought they had the right source. They clearly did not. The beach compacted down like it was concrete. We had to bring in giant equipment to basically rake and loosen the sand so it was conducive to turtle nesting. But under wave attack, that beach, with a couple of back-to-back storms, lasted about 16 months. That was, I believe, a $12 million project that just, went out with 1 year. So, the notion that we pump and we walk away from these beaches, no, this is forever. The last point I'd make on the dredging, beach, sediment compatibility, the logistics, and going back to that one photo of the ocean faring dredge, up and down the East Coast, you would think otherwise, but there's really only a handful of companies that are capable of doing this type of work. Pumping a mile of beach, we're talking $10-15 million. 3 to 4 years, we've got to do it again. Does it match up that on a natural beach, Montauk, coarser sediments because of its location? The sediment source that they're talking about, they have to go, I believe, roughly about 8 or 10 miles using a hopper dredge where they self-load. They have to steam offshore to the specific location, coupled to a pipe, and pump it on. This is not easy. The notion that we have a bad situation, we can get on the phone and get the Corps to mobilize. It's not happening. Up and down the East Coast, every single coastal community is dealing with the same erosion trends, has the same demands on the Army Corps. The Fire Island, the Montauk Point plan, which we're waiting for execution, which is largely a sand replenishment project. The Corps has already made it clear, I believe after 30 years, the lifespan of the FIB project, they will be withdrawing from pumping beaches. And we're all paying attention to the national deficit and our ability to basically pay. $10-15 million a pop. The federal government will not be there forever at a 60% cost share. FIMP, in fact, I was at a presentation by the Army Corps a couple of weeks ago before Suffolk County. They have made it clear that the FIMP project, which has segments from Fire Island Inlet all the way out to Montauk, essentially beach replenishment, the federal government will cover the entire cost for the first installment. Subsequent installments, pumping 3 to 4 years, 5 years, whatever it may be. There's a requirement that the local governments assume some of that cost. We're talking 40% roughly as a whole. So New York State, Suffolk County, town of East Hampton, Southampton, Southold, wherever the location may be, there's going to be the expectation that, again, the local cost share will pay for sand replenishment. And again, I argue it's just not going to be doable because of cost constraints. And I'll leave you with the last slide. And I know this looks pretty cartoonish. This is from the same area in North Carolina, coastal retreat. You know, we have to recognize where it's untenable to maintain. Pumping beaches, back to that original slide of North Topsail, that community is being swallowed whole by basically the ocean and the bay, consuming it on the backside as bay waters rise. You know, can we keep up with pumping beaches? The geotextiles which destroy beaches, is that the solution? It's not. We've got to get real on locations where we have to exit these areas. And, you know, to the point of Dune Road, if folks know that location on the eastern stretch, which fronts Shinnecock Bay, the development out there is relatively minimal. We have a number of county and town parks, so it consumes land. I've asked Southampton Town to consider a moratorium and rezoning of that area just so we can start to think and talk about an exit strategy. And the first step to that is absolutely, we've got to put a hold on further development. Why would we be putting expensive homes in harm's way? Only to require, again, you know, that government step up with sand replenishment. You know, another item I won't get into deep, but the FEMA and the federal flood insurance, that is a absolutely broken program. We're spending enormous amount of dollars to basically rebuild in locations that we have no business rebuilding. Homes are lost through storm events, and instead of using that money to compel a sale at appropriate, proper value for that property, we are instead, through the federal government, providing insurance to rebuild in the same location. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As long as the feds are going to pay for your home to be rebuilt, people aren't going anywhere. So I would submit it's time for tough love, acknowledging the locations that are just, again, untenable, and start talking about an exit strategy. And while we have been lulled into the FIMP project program thinking, the feds are going to pay for beaches forever, that's just not true. So, instead of kicking the can down the road, which our elected officials really are inclined to do, rather than be bold and courageous in taking stances on coastal retreat, you are going along with a program that is unsustainable, both economically and environmentally. So again, let's get real about coastal retreat. Hashemamic, I didn't get into much detail. That's a 1.5 mile stretch. The Army Corps has developed they want to truck in sand, presumably from one of the quarries up in, I would assume probably Riverhead or Spionk area. We're talking hundreds of truckloads dumping directly on the beach from this, dumping quarry sand in these locations. That Hashemamic project, I believe its price tag is $17 million. The feds have committed 11. They want Suffolk County and the town of Southold to step up for the remainder. And to their credit, Suffolk County and the town of Southold, they have declined the cost share. So what's the answer? If, let's start talking about an exit strategy. So, back to tough love. Let's acknowledge where it's just untenable over the long term and start executing the appropriate planning steps to move back. Downtown Montauk, those 10 properties I talked about, they need to be basically extinguished, relocated where we can, build in that beach with a natural dune. The primary dune needs to be restored. And thus then in turn, you have true resilience, real resilience that provides protection for the commercial downtown. So this was my last slide, and happy to take any questions that folks have. Deb, anybody? We have any questions?
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much. That was such a great presentation. So we have a few questions. The first one is, are there any beach replenishment projects that are considered successful and beneficial?
I have seen a project actually in Sagaponack, Bridgehampton, that's roughly, I think, 6 or 7 years old. I believe it was a 3-mile replenishment project. They found very good sand source offshore. They pumped that beach, and it is outlasted the 3 to 4 year lifespan average because of high quality. But that project was paid by private property owners. The next time around, are they stepping up again? That remains to be seen. I want to be candid. In some locations, let me take you back down to South Florida, where you have intense development. There's no turning back. They've got to find a way to pump beaches and pay for it. When you get into locations that just don't have the intensity of the development, we've got to find an alternative. And I think back to sand replenishment. Inlet bypassing, sand bypassing is so critical, and we've really got to commit efforts to recovering sand lost by these inlets and to be placing it down drift. So that's sand replenishment. I fully support that in a very aggressive way on an annual basis to keep the beaches filled. But again, over the long term and I say the holistic strategy, we've got to do things differently.
Okay. The next question is, those sandbags in Montauk are so sad. Is the loss in court because of wealthy property owners and their lawyers who have unfair influence in the courts?
Let me get to some of Montauk. Here we go. Again, this was an Army Corps plan. This installation, again, is roughly 4 years old. The Corps, I believe the funding came from a Hurricane Sandy response. So it was a $10 million project. You saw the conditions of it now and what we're doing. Again, this facelift, if you will, is roughly $1 million a year. Again, this is East Hampton tax dollars as well as Suffolk County tax dollars that are going to keeping some semblance of sand out there. We've got to start talking about relocation of downtown Montauk properties. So 10 properties. This does not happen overnight. In my mind, it's a 10, maybe a 15 year endeavor to actually execute. But at a minimum, we've got to start initiating planning steps, assessing these properties, finding out what their value is, figuring out means of acquisition. And, I would say when we're fully committed that condemnation is part of the process, meaning failure to voluntarily move, being compensated justly for the value. We've got to compel relocation. So we've got to acquire these lands where possible. And I guess the last point on acquisition, particularly the East End and South Shore, with the activity of real estate in both East Hampton and Southampton towns, the Community Preservation Fund, which goes toward water quality protection and acquisition of open space, as well as acquisition of coastal properties, we should be more aggressive in going after acquisition on the coast to ensure that, again, the functionality of a beach dune, bluff dune system is intact. We have walkable recreational beaches into the future. And then again, the habitat value is intact.
Okay, great. I have a question here. What can we do as individuals and community members to get our government to do things differently?
Great question. It's really a voicing your opinion. And the program I do with this presentation, I try to do this as often as possible. I'm trying to raise awareness as to the basically coastal processes and make the argument that, again, long term it's unsustainable to stay in place in certain locations. Register your concerns with the elected officials. Right now, who they hear from is the 10 property owners in downtown Montauk. They want sand. They want the maintenance to happen tomorrow. I mean, they are pushing very hard for the Army Corps, which added Montauk in the Fire Island to Montauk plan. A couple of years ago, it was not included, but the pushback after the sandbag installation, they convinced the Army Corps to do Army Corps will do a one-time only sand replenishment. And I've been asking the question, sand compatibility. I know their borrow sites through the documents that they have, and I've got into the technical reports. Again, we're talking 8 or 10 miles away. That's a hopper dredge. The mobilization to basically bring in a contractor just to have that hopper dredge show up is a $5 million mobilization fee. And then on top of that is actually to pump the beach. And then are we coming back in 3 years to do it all over again? I submit it's going to be very difficult. So let's start talking about relocation, as the town had acknowledged in their planning report for the Hamlet study, that in my opinion, they actually are waffling on because, again, the private ownership and the influence that they have over some elected officials, I don't mean individually, but collectively, it's too great of an influence. And the community at large, the tax base that, again, where public tax dollars are going to these endeavors, we've got to weigh in on this, because public trust doctrine, the availability of public resources is paramount, should be paramount to everything we do.
The New York State DEC is giving out permits. So what can be done about stopping that?
A couple of years ago, I got into the permits a bit. I was informed of internal operations with the DEC. Actually, let me back up. The Department of State, New York State Department of State, has established coastal policy. And their number one priority is the protection of natural protected features, beaches and dunes, bluffs and beaches. Unfortunately, again, because of the influence of private property owners, and I don't want to mince this, as a regulator, when someone's property is eroding, it's very difficult to not allow them to have some form of protection. But oftentimes that protection comes at a cost of public resources. And the state of New York has been issuing these permits left and right. Another problem with their regulatory authority, what's called the Coastal Erosion Hazard Act, which gives them authority to manage the coast. They delegate authority down to the municipalities. The towns have this delegated authority. Some of the villages have delegated authority. And I can tell you clearly, they do not have the staff nor the expertise to manage this. So in turn, they are issuing these permits. Back to the photo of the three-sided seawall in Southampton. That was issued by the village, surrendering public resources to private interest. So the only way we're going to really put an end to this is, en masse, the public at large really weighs in on this and has a powerful collective voice to prioritize public resources over private interests.
I have a few, they're not really questions, but one is, most people don't know anything about this. How about giving talks in the schools as well as other programs?
Absolutely. I am looking forward to other invitations to present. I'll say in the last couple of years, roughly in the similar subject is, probably 15 or 20 of these I've done so far. And, the elected officials, I will add this, while North Fork Environmental Council publicized this, I sent out an email with that invitation, to hundreds of people, and many of those were elected officials. And, I hope they're tuned in today to really get a better grasp on this. This is my expertise, my training, my master's degree in dune restoration in urban environments. I know this stuff inside and out. I don't expect, an elected official that may be an attorney or some other profession to know this, but you have to embrace this information. And then for the, again, in the interest of public interest, be making these decisions, hard choices that are going to protect resources for the long term. And, what I'm finding when you're on 2, 3, 4-year election cycles, it's very difficult for an elected official to, show that courage, when they can easily just kick the can down the road. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. I have a few more. One is, are short length groins in front of bayfront homes a good thing? Or bayfront properties a good thing?
Groins, again, whether it be short or long, there's a groin field in West Hampton Beach that was installed by the West Hampton Dunes in the late 60s by the Corps of Engineers. They're lengthy groins. I mean, they do their job engineering wise. They compartmentize and retain sand. But again, you are restricting littoral drift. You're interfering with that. It's an intervention. So inevitably, the downdrift property owner will be sand starved. So across the board, no, we can't allow the groins to come in. In navigable inlets, there's no turning back. But the groin fields I have seen and the structures in the Peconic Bay system, it's just, for me, it's mind-boggling. There's no rhyme or reason to it, and now we're seeing the problems associated with, again, a hodgepodge of structure that honestly there should have never been any, and then this way the system functions as it's intended.
Okay, there's a question. What can people do to get the DOS to release the most current coastal erosion hazard area maps? The publicly available maps, I believe, are decades old.
Great question. It's actually the Department of Environmental Conservation, I believe, is sitting on those maps. And let me describe for the listeners, viewers, there is a surveyed line, a coastal erosion line. Essentially, that line some years ago was moved back. So it was responding to the changes of the shoreline. The survey and the line exists as with the institution, with the agency, but they've yet to come forward and actually put it into law and basically have it public. I would argue they're scared. Because there's inevitably going to be pushback. You're affecting, private property owners and construction activities out there. They're dragging their feet on this. And again, this is kicking the can down the road. And we're only going to pay more dearly later because of the delays. Our elected officials, they need to compel DEC through federal and state officials to get going on this. Let's get that line established on surveys, and let's start adopting it and adhering to it, and not allowing the exceptions that come left and right out of that agency, as well as the delegated authorities, from the towns and villages.
All right, well, I think that's all the questions.
Okay.
Just so everyone knows, we are recording this, and so it will be available on our website, and we'll also be sending it to Kevin so he can distribute it as well. So,
And if I may, and I apologize, I didn't have the lighting on with the sunset, so if I'm creeping into the dark, but please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. My email is mac.waterwarrior@icloud, and my cell, feel free to call me, 631-599-9326. Again, those contacts, mac.waterwarrior@icloud.com. Phone number 631-599-9326. And again, I want to thank NFEC for hosting this and inviting me, and all the viewers for your interest and paying attention. So thank you.
Kevin, thank you so much. What I'd like to do is just share with everyone, NFEC is also participating in a program, a water quality monitoring program in Long Island Sound. And actually Dawn and her brother, Dan, are out once a week, either in Goldsmith Inlet or Mattatuck Inlet. And they are doing all different kinds of testing, chlorophyll, turbidity, oxygen levels. Go ahead, Dawn, you're familiar with the whole list.
well, I guess salinity is another one, and that's basically it. Temperature, different temperatures at different depths. Yeah.
And this is a study that's funded by the United States EPA. We are partnering with Save the Sound, and this is being done throughout Long Island Sound on many different fronts, many different locations. So we're pleased to be a part of that. But what I will ask you all is please consider supporting our two very worthy organizations. I mean, we're here to advocate for you, advocate for the environment. We're also here to educate you and, be in the schools and do different programs. So, please, not-for-profits are just that, our budgets are shoestring budgets.